Hi, this is Justin Colletti of Sonic Scoop, and today, as part of MixCon, we're going to do a deep dive into this microphone that's right in front of me. It is a pretty nondescript looking mic, just plain, basic, black, but underneath the hood, there's a lot going on. This is the most affordable modeling microphone in the world right now that I know of that you can just hook up with a USB cable right into your computer. In fact, it's really one of only a few USB-based modeling mics made, and it goes for about a third of the price, what you'd expect from some of the other higher-end modeling microphones out there, including other modeling mics made by this company. That company is Antelope Audio, and this microphone is known as the Axino synergycore. It's a microphone and interface in one. It's got its own onboard A to D conversion, D to A conversion, headphone output with headphone amplifier, and even its own built-in DSP for processing effects in real time going in with practically zero latency. EQ, compression, reverb, even de-essing, and more. But first, big thanks to Antelope Audio for sponsoring MixCon. They sponsored a really long presentation from Brian Viberts, a 7-time Grammy winner, where he takes us through his entire process of getting a final mix. That one's excellent. You've got to check it out. He's a big fan of the Antelope Audio gear, and I've been playing around with this microphone that they've sent me on pretty much every video that I've done since they sent it to me, because it's not just one microphone. It is a dozen or more microphones in one. And I want to explore it together with you, let you hear what this mic is about, and what so many of the most important, most classic, and most coveted mics in history sound like. If you've never compared some of these famous mics to one another before, we're going to be able to do that right now inside of the Axino program. So you understand, it's a little bit like an interface in that not only does it take our analog signal and change into digital, but it actually has DSP power built in. So it's kind of like an advanced interface where you can actually apply effects inside the microphone and record with them in real time. Of course, you're also given the opportunity to record the totally dry sound of this microphone, not, with a mic model, not with one of the compressors or preamps or EQ models that come with it. So you can just use it like a traditional standalone mic. But where it really gets interesting is in all of the mic models that are in here. Right now, I'm speaking through the basic Axino mic model. This is just the mic by itself, and for a mic in its price point, it sounds pretty good, and it sounds pretty much how you'd expect a mic in this price point to sound. And you can use it on just about any source as is. I mean, it's a slightly tailored response that's transparent, but a little clear in kind of the right places. But the mic models here is obviously the reason that most people are buying this microphone. So we're going to hear them together. And to make good mic models that are really convincing, it's not only about emulating the frequency response of some of these classic microphones, but it's also about emulating other things like the transient response. In the case of a multi-capsule modeling microphone, it might be even emulating some of the unique polar patterns of some of the mic models. But let's dive in, take a look at the actual application that comes along with it, and hear not only some of these mic models, but also things like mic preamps, compressors, EQs, even the built-in reverb that's part of this. This is a package that I think is going to be really interesting for people who are kind of singer-songwriters, vocalists, podcasters, or even if you own a studio where you have a lot of different vocalists and instrumentalists coming through, where you want to have a whole bunch of different mics to suit a whole bunch of different singers or speakers, you could get something like that out of this by buying one mic once for $400 instead of buying several different $1,000 microphones again. So the idea here is you get some of the flexibility of spending literally tens of thousands of dollars in mics in a $400 package that pretty much anyone can afford, plug straight into their laptop or computer and just go. All right, let's dive right in. So first things first, I'm going to put on my headphones to hear this along with you. And there's actually a headphone output right inside the microphone because this is an interface basically as well as being a microphone. So here on the actual software program that comes with the Axino, the synergycore, is you'll see an input level and a headphone output that are pretty self-explanatory. I'm going to turn up the headphone output a little bit so I can hear myself better, but I can actually do that right here on the interface itself by ticking this knob, and it changes that headphone volume in real time. There are a couple of different gain stages here. There's actually an initial analog gain stage. I have my own volume control right here on the microphone, and that will turn up the analog gain stage that's inside the microphone. And then there's an additional digital gain stage here a little later on in the mic, right over here. And at this point, I'm going to start speaking a little bit more on axis to the microphone. This one has a somewhat tight cardioid pattern where you'll have a decent amount of rejection off to the sides. And I'm going to go in here, and just the most obvious thing you can do is just start going through the mic models. I've gone through so many of these, and a lot of them sound really persuasive. For the first one, the Tokyo 800T, this is almost certainly a recreation of the Sony C800G, which was made in the early 90s and really was a super popular microphone with pop, R&B, and hip-hop singers. Really kind of nice, glossy top-end sound without being too upper mid-range forward. So it has this nice kind of air going on with it. And it has basically the kind of character you'd expect from an 800G. They have 800T written here, which I imagine means tube because it was a tube-based microphone. But each of these models do sound pretty close to what you'd expect out of them. So the Berlin 47 FT, what do you think that's going to be? Almost certainly this is a Neumann FET 47, and you hear a drastic change. I mean, this was a mic that was really, really popular on kick drum, still to this day is, especially as an outside kick drum mic, as a bass cabinet microphone, and it does really well also on a lot of male voices. There's this kind of power and girth and mid-range forward vibe to the FET 47 that I've just always loved. One of my favorite Neumanns of all time is the Neumann U67. Of course, they've got that modeled here as well. This is a similar family of microphone. The 67 capsules, these sound a little bit different than the 47. We get a little bit more of an upper mid-range lift, but an overall really dark and smooth sound. And then you go to one of the most popular Neumanns of all time, the Neumann U87. And here is kind of a U87 type model where we're getting a little bit brighter here than on a 67 and probably a little less saturation when pushed hard. So here is the U67. Now I'm speaking into the U67, and now I'm going to switch over to the U87, which is a little bit brighter, clearer, more modern take on that same kind of vibe. They really share a common heritage. And that difference, which is a little bit subtle, but also, I think, somewhat significant. Is it subtle and significant at the same time? Yes! That's really the best I could say for the difference between the U67 and the U87. These are the kinds of differences I would expect to hear between a real 67 and a real 87. Like, that's about as far apart as they are. So there's the 87, and now here we are going back to the 67 again, which is just a little darker and smoother. My favorite of these Neumann models so far, probably this Neumann M103. These are, I think, beautiful on a lot of male voices, a lot of string instruments. It doesn't have that same kind of mid-range forward push as something like a U47 or a U87. And it just, there's something that's a little bit more, big and round on bottom and a little bit smooth on top that, is really a signature of these M series. And it was interesting when I was talking to Brian Vibberts, who did the sponsored mixcon presentation along with Antelope Audio. I was talking to him through this microphone, and he immediately, sight unseen, picked this out. I was like, are you talking through a Neumann M series model? So if a 7-time Grammy winner immediately recognizes this as being a Neumann M series, then they're at least in the right ballpark for a microphone that costs something like less than $400 right now as I'm speaking to you in the summer of 2021. This is one I can see using quite a lot. There's so many more. I don't want to go through every single microphone in here, but let's skip around a little bit. So the Vienna 12, this to me looks like it would be an AKG C12 modeled after maybe the recreations of the C12 that they made. And they had another similar mic to this a little further down on the list, the Berlin 251, which I'm guessing this one is a little bit more like the Elam Telefunken 251, really similar sound to the C12. And this is, again, one of my favorite microphones of all time. You can tell this one's a little bit kind of thicker and kind of girthier maybe than the other C12 that we were listening to, the Vienna 12, which to me just sounds a little cleaner, a little brighter, a little bit more of a modern take on the C12 kind of vibe. Both cool mics, and you can get these subtle differences in the same family. Of course, there's also dynamic mics in here. The Illinois 7B. Any guesses on what that's going to be? Yes, obviously, a Shure SM7B recreation. Does this sound like a Shure SM7B? Without any EQ and without any of the filters engaged in the Shure SM7B, yeah, this is kind of what they sound like. They're a little bit pillowy, a little bit dark. In fact, when I used to use my Shure SM7B on the Sonic Scoop podcast, I often engage both the low-cut filter and the high-frequency boost filter, because without that, it would just sound, yeah, a little bit on the thick and viscous side. If you want a kind of brighter sounding dynamic mic that I think is really one that people aren't using as much these days in the pro audio world, but probably should, the Minnesota 20. This is the RE20, and these are super popular in radio. I mean, it's a relatively bright, tight sounding dynamic microphone that almost has like a condenser-like quality for it, but like the transient response of a dynamic microphone, and has these special ports that really reduces proximity effect. And I think that's another one of the reasons that these have been so popular in radio for so long. When people kind of move on and off axis, get closer, get further away, you don't get some of these radical tonal changes that you will with other dynamics. Whoa, I just flipped through another dynamic. This one is another microphone that I own here. This is the Sennheiser 441, an emulation of it. Another slightly kind of bright condensory dynamic. This is one that's been super popular on things like bottom snare drum. I think it actually works great as a voiceover mic. Given my choice between the two of them, I think that I would probably end up preferring the Minnesota 20, this RE20 vibe on more voices. But this 441, I think, is also not to be underestimated. It's somewhere kind of in between the Shure SM7B, that big, thick-sounding dynamic voiceover mic, and the really bright-sounding RE20 voiceover microphone. Of course, there's other things if you want to use this inside of a kick drum. You've got the AKG D112 kind of vibe, right? Where it's super scooped in the mid-range with a little bit of a presence peak. Not something I think to use on vocals very often, although some people on some occasions have used these kick drum and bass-oriented microphones on vocals with good result. But I think it's more of a kind of special effect mic for a vocal situation. But it's cool to know that you could put this microphone on a kick drum, just have this as one of the many mics in your studio, and just have yourself a D112 that you could grab for kick drum, have yourself a FET 47 that you could grab for kick drum or bass cab, and just the ability to go through all of these microphones. Here's another Telefunken, I'd imagine, U47 model that you can check out in here. They've got a Shure SM57 model. Does that sound like a Shure SM57? It has that 3K, 5K presence peak that you'd expect out of a Shure SM57, no doubt. You could put this microphone in front of an electric guitar cab, all of a sudden start recording close mic electric guitar sounds with this Shure SM57 model. So a lot of great stuff in here, and they all do sound generally the way that they're supposed to. Here's another all-time favorite of mine, the AKG 414. Let's bring that up, and here's an AKG 414. It looks like it's they're going for this 1970s kind of EB iteration of these, maybe a brass capsule one. And yeah, it does sound more like that, less like the super bright and chimey TL2 or XL2 iteration, less like the really thick and woody BULS iteration of the microphone. It does give me that sense of the 70s era EB 414s. To really do this thing absolute justice, you could compare this microphone back to back to any number of all these extremely high-end microphones you've been listening to. We'd have to get literally tens upon tens of thousands of dollars of mics in here to compare this one against real versions of all of these. Is this one, for $400 right now in the summer of 2021, a useful addition to your mic locker or potentially a useful first mic? I'd say absolutely. I mean, there are other microphones. Let me just switch over to one of my favorites as I'm speaking through this. Let me go back to the M103. There are other microphones that would also be great buys in the $400 range that'll just have one sound, and we'll have a good version of that one sound. But the cool thing about the Axino is that it also has that one simple $400 microphone sound built in. This, I think, sounds fairly comparable to other microphones you'll find in this price range, but just all of this other stuff that's going on under the hood, giving you the Neumann U87 style of sound right off the bat. For $400, it's a pretty difficult value to beat, either as an additional Swiss Army knife microphone to have in your locker, or as your sole voiceover or vocalist microphone, like a single microphone that's supposed to work on every source, but doesn't have to be one size fits all. I mean, it's pretty hard to beat the value here, but we've only really gone looking at the tip of the iceberg so far, because under the hood, there's more than just these mic models. We can go in here and add additional things, like some of these vintage mic preamps, and I can immediately pull up, say, a Neve 1073 mic preamp to put my U87 through. And there are a few preamps included with this one right out of the box. And here's another cool one, the VPA 76. More of a Telefunken kind of vibe. You really hear it smooth out and thicken up the sound considerably compared to, again, going back to our BAE 1073. Here's, again, a Neve 1073 style microphone. There's some pretty significant differences as far as mic preamps go. But it goes beyond that, too. It has some compressors built in. I have unlocked all of the different compressors and EQs you can get for the Axino. They're sold individually, but they come with, I believe, a couple of compressors, couple of EQs, couple of mic preamps right out of the gate. One of the add-on options here is one of my favorite compressors of all time, the Summit TLA 100A. Let me go ahead and soften the sound of this ever so slightly by going back through this VPA 76 preamp, and let me really fatten this up even more by switching over to the M103. I mean, that's a pretty significant change in tone, pretty fast. I mean, this is really a Swiss Army knife microphone. And I've always loved this TLA 100A because you can drive it pretty hard into gain reduction. Let's really push this thing a little bit. We'll add some gain here, and then we'll really make the gain reduction go way up. Let me drive this guy a little harder. It looks like I could juice up the input a little bit more from the microphone. Let me juice that up a little bit more, and I'll control these levels in post here. And now you're hearing my background noise coming up too, because we're really starting to push this thing into kind of significant compression and significant overdrive too on the V76. Let me get rid of this preamp. So now we're hearing it just getting us pretty significant compression through the Summit TLA 100A. I can switch this to a fast attack, get rid of some of that initial transient, bit of a slower release, and here we are compressing a absolute metric ton with this thing. And aside from the ambient noise floor of my room coming up, still having really usable results, which is what you'd expect out of something like the Summit TLA 100A. All right, I'm going to kill this one too. And when you start to do that much compression, you might run into issues of excess essing and teas and things like that. So it does come with, as well, this master de-esser plugin that we can use to catch some of those errant S's and T's. So let's go in here. We've got a fast attack. It's already reducing some of my S's and T's. Let's bring the threshold down on this. Sally sells seashells by the seashore. Let's get rid of some more of these S's. Sally sells seashells by the seashore, and compare that without it running. Here it is with the threshold way up. Sally sells seashells by the seashore, and Sally sells seashells by the seashore. That's getting us to a little bit of a better balance. I'll go ahead and kill this de-esser as well for a second, and this whole added effects panel, because the next thing I want to focus on is this reverb unit that they have built in. So we can do a reverb send here and automatically send to our reverb. There it is. And you've got a few different modes here. Right now we're in a massive hall. We can click over to a large room. We can click over to a small room. There's even in between, oh, here's a train station. There's a little bit of a doubler delay effect for a little bit of a kind of slapback. And you can also change the width on these, so you can make them into really mono effects. Let's hear that in the massive hall, or spread them out into a wider stereo. And of course, you have control over the reverb return level as well. Let me stop sending here. There we go. So you can just monitor through these effects, or you can print them. And right now I am printing all of the effects, the compression, any EQ or de-essing I was applying. I even had this reverb being printed, but you could turn off of this button, and now you're just monitoring with the reverb, and now you are printing the reverb as well as monitoring with it. So you don't have to print with the effects. You can also do both. You can use these other channels in the Axino to print a totally dry, unaffected version of the microphone. So you can just monitor with effects, you can record effects, or you can record both clean and with effects. And the microphone also has additional outputs, so you can kind of get a headphone mix going here on the mixer. So I could turn up or down a secondary source. So this USB 1.2, I could send this to set this to be my backing tracks, something like that. I can have yet another external source coming in on USB 3.4, and I could either print these extra sources as well, or I can just be monitoring through them. So you get a kind of multi-channel headphone mixer as part of this microphone, as well as all these mic models and the additional effects and the yet more additional effects that you can add on to it. So there's a lot of applications for this thing, whether for a singer-songwriter, additional mic in the locker at a studio, a podcaster, or someone doing voiceover work. Really, any of those areas I could see this thing working pretty well in. I can also hide and show this mixer section, so I don't have to be looking at this mixer if I don't need all that functionality. And of course, I can save my own presets, or you can even use some of the custom presets that are in here. So they've got a voiceover preset, for instance. Let's check that out. Click voiceover, and it's given me the Shure SM7B going through a pretty serious EQ and compressor combo. So that's a pretty radical option there. Male clean vocals. Oh, here we've got, this one's got a little bit of reverb baked into it. It looks like it is a bottle style microphone going through a little bit of reverb, a little bit of API EQ, a little bit of LA2A compression. They've got a phone effect here as well. Now the 441. I don't really need all this reverb send, I think, for this phone effect. Let's tuck it back a little bit more. We got another one here called harsh vocals. So we're getting really bright sound out of this one. One called ghostly acoustic guitar. So this one's really tailored for strumming into. Let's find out what that would sound like. I actually have an acoustic guitar right here. So there's a ton of presets in here. We got one vintage radio, a whole bunch of stuff. Let me go ahead and clear all of these again. And just get right back into our dry RE20. So I hope that's a cool, useful tour for you. I mean, it's a microphone you could use on snare, on bass, on vocals, on just about anything, because it can sound like just about any of the most major and important microphones made. To get into an alternative to this, right now at this present date, would require you spending about 3 times more than this at least to get a comparable microphone, either from Antelope or just like one other brand that makes them. But if you're interested in the world of modeling microphones, it seems like a really good bet to me. So see if you can try out one of these for yourself. I gotta say, I was pretty impressed for a microphone at this price point to have this much tonal flexibility. I mean, even if you're like in a high-end studio with a ton of microphones, you can kind of justify the extremely low price point on it to have a few more models of some other high-end microphones. But if you're really looking for a first mic / interface just to sing and record through and not have to worry about having a separate mic and a separate interface, like, why not get the one that has the real-time processing with basically zero latency of effects going on the way in, and having the ability to do some pretty persuasive impressions of some of the most popular and important microphones of all time, and be able to test out the microphones that sound best on your own voice. Even if you're using this thing as a learning tool, going rapidly from one mic model to another, just like I am right now, I think that you'd very quickly come away with an idea of the different families of mics, the different categories of mics, how they sound, how they compare to each other, and which ones sound best for you. So if it was even your long-range goal, to upgrade to one microphone that's going to sound awesome on you overall, I think this is a good way to kind of get started auditioning a bunch of different microphones on your own voice, even if the plan to upgrade to a non-modeling mic in the future is one for you. But I've got to say, based on the user feedback that I've seen for the higher end versions of this mic, like the Edge Go, people who own the Antelope modeling microphones seem to really like them and really get a lot of use out of them. This is my first week with this microphone, so it's my first time using it, but my general impressions are that things sound pretty much how I'd expect them to sound compared to one another. Have I compared their Tokyo 800T model to a real Sony C800G that's going to cost 5 figures? No, I haven't. But I have spoken into, sung into, and recorded others speaking into and singing into that microphone. And the way that the 800T in here sounds compared to the 414 in here and sounds compared to the 87 in here are pretty much how you'd expect those microphones to sound relative to one another. So there's clearly some decent research and intelligence going into the models here. Here, I'll go back for my closing remarks to one of my favorites in here, the Neumann M103. I hope you've enjoyed this tour through the Axino. Big thanks again to Antelope Audio for making that Brian Vibbert's presentation free to the public and being a sponsor at MixCon. I hope you've enjoyed this little virtual workshop and demonstration on this mic. If you got any questions, feel free to hit them into the comment box down below, and I'll try my best to answer them. If you found this video to be useful or any of our other MixCon videos, remember to hit like and subscribe, hit that notifications bell so you don't miss any more great ones like this one. Check out this mic and everything Antelope makes over at antelopeaudio.com. This has been Justin Colletti of Sonic Scoop. Thanks for hanging out with me. See you next time.